The bride was smiling for the cameras when the room suddenly forgot to look at her. It happened in less than 3 seconds. Not because someone made a scene, not because anyone raised their voice, but because a woman everyone thought had been left behind quietly walked through the doors. The ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers that scattered warm light across white linen tables and polished marble floors. A string quartet played near the grand staircase while servers moved between guests carrying trays of champagne. Everything looked exactly the way Ethan Brooks had imagined it would. Perfect, elegant, impressive. This was his night, his wedding, his victory lap. At least, that was the plan. Ethan stood beside Sophie Mitchell near the center of the room, greeting friends, investors, and relatives who had traveled from across the country. Sophie looked beautiful beneath the soft lights, her ivory gown catching every flash from the photographers. People smiled. People applauded. People congratulated them. Then the entrance doors opened. At first, almost nobody noticed. One guest glanced over. Then another. Conversations softened. Heads slowly turned. A few seconds later, the change spread through the ballroom like a ripple across still water. Naomi Carter stepped inside. Her black evening gown was simple. No glitter. No dramatic train. No attempt to compete with the bride. She carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who no longer needed approval from anyone in the room. Her posture was relaxed. Her expression unreadable. The heels of her shoes clicked softly against the marble floor as she walked forward. Nothing about her entrance was loud. Yet somehow, it became impossible to ignore. Ethan saw her immediately. The smile on his face remained exactly where it was, but something shifted behind his eyes. For months, he had imagined this moment. Maybe even longer. He had pictured Naomi hearing about the wedding, hearing about Sophie, hearing about the life he was building without her. And now she was here, standing inside the celebration that officially closed the chapter they once shared. Several guests exchanged quiet looks. They remembered Naomi. Some remembered her from years ago when she attended company dinners beside Ethan. Others remembered seeing her help organize events while Ethan accepted praise from people who barely knew her name. A woman near the bar leaned toward her husband and whispered something. Another guest lowered his champagne glass and watched Naomi cross the room. The bride was still smiling. The music was still playing, but attention had begun drifting somewhere else. Naomi paused near the entrance for only a moment before continuing forward. She greeted an older couple with a polite smile. She thanked a server who offered her a drink. Nothing more, nothing less. Yet every movement seemed effortless, as if she belonged there just as much as anyone else. Maybe more. Across the ballroom, Ethan adjusted his jacket and forced a laugh at something a guest had said. But his gaze kept returning to Naomi, the woman he once believed would fade quietly into the background. The woman he expected to arrive carrying regret. Instead, she arrived carrying something far more dangerous. Peace. And as the night continued, nobody realized they were witnessing the first crack in the story Ethan had spent years trying to write. Because the wedding had only just begun, and the spotlight was already moving. By the time Naomi reached the champagne table, she could feel it happening. Not the judgment. She had expected that. Not the whispers either. Every large room had them. What surprised her was how quickly curiosity replaced certainty. People had already decided who she was before she arrived. The ex-wife. The woman from the past. The chapter that had ended. Yet the moment they saw her standing there, calm and completely unshaken, those assumptions began to crack. Across the ballroom, conversations drifted away from centerpieces, travel plans, and wedding photos. Guests who had not spoken about Naomi in years suddenly remembered her name. A man near the bar squinted for a second before recognition crossed his face. Two women standing beside the dance floor exchanged glances and quietly began talking. Nobody was being rude. Nobody was creating a scene. But the question seemed to move from table to table all on its own. Why was she here? Naomi accepted a glass of sparkling water and thanked the server with a polite smile. Her hand remained steady. Her expression never changed. She looked exactly like someone attending a wedding. Nothing more. Yet somehow that only deepened the mystery. Most people expected heartbreak to leave visible scars. They expected bitterness, regret, sadness. Instead, Naomi looked peaceful. And peace confused people far more than pain ever could. Ethan noticed the shift immediately. Every few minutes his attention drifted away from his guests and back toward her. He caught fragments of conversations. He saw people looking in her direction. It irritated him more than he wanted to admit. Tonight was supposed to be simple. The story was supposed to be obvious. He was moving forward. Sophie was his future. Naomi was his past. Clean. Predictable. Finished. But the room did not seem interested in following that script. Sophie noticed it too. At first she ignored it. Then she began catching people looking past her shoulder, looking toward the woman standing quietly near the windows overlooking the city skyline. The view beyond the glass stretched for miles. Thousands of lights glittered beneath the night sky. Naomi stood there for a moment, looking out at the city instead of at the celebration behind her. She seemed completely comfortable being alone. That detail unsettled some people more than they realized, because loneliness and solitude looked very different. And Naomi was clearly not lonely. Near one of the tables, an older guest leaned closer to another and lowered his voice. He remembered seeing Naomi years ago at company functions, back when Ethan's business was still small, back before luxury hotels and expensive receptions became part of the picture. Another guest remembered how supportive she had always been, how she somehow knew everyone's name, how she always made other people feel important. Piece by piece, memories resurfaced. Not dramatic memories. Human ones. The kind that quietly stay with people. Meanwhile, Ethan continued greeting guests, shaking hands, posing for photographs, and smiling for cameras. But every time applause erupted or another toast was announced, he found himself checking where Naomi was standing, as if some invisible force kept pulling his attention back to her. Then something unexpected happened. A wedding planner approached Naomi with a warm smile and spoke to her for nearly a minute. They laughed together, not because of anything extraordinary, just a natural conversation between two people. Yet several guests watched the exchange with interest. They expected awkwardness. They expected discomfort. Instead, they saw ease, confidence, grace, and little by little, the question that had traveled through the ballroom began changing shape. It was no longer why she came. It was who she had become. And for the first time that evening, Naomi Carter was no longer being viewed as Ethan Brooks's former wife. She was becoming the most intriguing person in the room. Some people mistake confidence for happiness. Ethan Brooks made that mistake the moment he saw Naomi smiling. From across the ballroom, he watched her speaking with guests, accepting polite greetings, and moving through the room with an ease that did not belong to someone who was supposed to feel uncomfortable. The more relaxed she appeared, the more determined he became to remind everyone exactly why she was there, or at least why he believed she was there. Another round of applause filled the ballroom as a family friend finished a toast. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter drifted through the air. The celebration continued exactly as planned. Yet Ethan could not shake the feeling that something had slipped beyond his control. For years he had been the center of attention in every room he entered. Tonight should have been no different. Instead, every few minutes, he caught people glancing toward Naomi. That bothered him more than he expected. Finally, he set down his drink and started walking in her direction. Several guests noticed immediately. Conversations softened. Eyes followed him across the floor. Naomi was standing near one of the floral displays when she saw him approaching. She did not move. She did not look nervous. She simply waited. Ethan arrived wearing the same polished smile he had shown photographers all evening. The kind of smile that looked friendly in pictures but revealed very little underneath. "Naomi," he said warmly, "I am glad you made it." "Thank you for inviting me," she replied. Her voice remained calm. Ethan nodded and glanced around at the nearby guests who suddenly seemed very interested in their drinks. "Have you met Sophie tonight?" he asked. Before Naomi could answer, Sophie stepped beside him. Her smile was gracious and perfectly rehearsed. Ethan placed a hand lightly against Sophie's shoulder. "Sophie, this is Naomi." The introduction sounded unnecessary. Everyone understood exactly who Naomi was. Sophie extended her hand politely. Naomi shook it with a sincere smile. "Congratulations," Naomi said. "I hope you both have a wonderful future." For a brief second, Ethan looked almost disappointed by how smoothly the exchange went. Then he tried another approach. "You know," he said with a laugh, "Sophie has been helping me organize everything. I forgot how much work weddings actually take." A few guests chuckled politely. Naomi simply nodded. "I'm sure it does." Ethan continued. "Thankfully, things are easier when you find the right partner." The words hung in the air longer than they should have. Not openly cruel, not openly disrespectful, just sharp enough for everyone nearby to understand the meaning beneath them. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Sophie glanced toward Ethan for the briefest moment. Naomi took a sip of water before responding. "The right partner makes many things easier," she said. Her tone remained gentle. No anger, no defense, no attempt to win the exchange. Somehow that made Ethan's comment feel smaller. Around them, the silence grew heavier. People expected tension. They expected Naomi to react. Instead, she remained completely composed. Ethan forced another smile, but something in his expression tightened. The conversation was not going the way he imagined. He had expected regret, maybe sadness, maybe even resentment. What he found instead was a woman who seemed entirely at peace, standing in a room that should have reminded her of loss. Nearby guests began watching Naomi more closely than Ethan, not because she was speaking loudly, not because she was trying to command attention, but because every attempt to diminish her seemed to reveal something unexpected: strength, sophistication, control. Ethan eventually excused himself and guided Sophie toward another group of guests. Yet even as he walked away, he could feel it. The room had witnessed the interaction, and nobody was talking about what he said. They were talking about how Naomi handled it. For the first time that evening, the groom had tried to take back the spotlight. Instead, he had pushed it even closer to the woman he wanted everyone to forget. While the music continued and guests returned to their conversations, something else quietly began happening inside the room. People were no longer looking at Naomi because she was Ethan's former wife. They were looking at her because they were remembering things. Small things, forgotten things, details that had once seemed unimportant. An older investor standing near the dance floor watched Naomi speaking with a couple from Chicago and suddenly remembered a conference nearly 12 years earlier, back when Ethan's company occupied a modest office above a retail store. Back when success was not guaranteed. He remembered arriving for a meeting and finding Naomi arranging chairs before sunrise because the company could not afford event staff. Another guest remembered late-night networking dinners where Naomi greeted every attendee by name while Ethan focused on presentations and sales pitches. Piece by piece, memories surfaced. Not because Naomi brought them up. She never did. But because success has a strange way of rewriting history. And sometimes all it takes is one unexpected appearance for people to begin correcting the record. Years earlier, before luxury hotels and tailored suits became part of Ethan's life, there had been long months filled with uncertainty. Rent payments, tight budgets, endless work. Naomi remembered those years clearly. She remembered waking before dawn and reviewing invoices at the kitchen table while coffee cooled beside her laptop. She remembered spending weekends helping prepare investor materials because there was no one else to do it. She remembered celebrating tiny victories that most people would never notice. The first client, the first profitable quarter, the first office with an actual conference room. Through every milestone, she had stood beside Ethan. Not behind him, beside him. Yet somewhere along the way, that distinction disappeared. As Ethan's company grew, so did the attention surrounding him. Magazine interviews followed. Industry awards arrived. Invitations to exclusive events became routine. People praised his vision, his leadership, his determination. And little by little, Naomi became invisible inside a story she had helped build. Nobody intended it at first. That was what made it so easy to miss. Recognition flowed in one direction. Credit followed the spotlight. Eventually, even Ethan seemed to believe the success belonged entirely to him. Naomi remembered sitting alone one evening in their home after another corporate gala. Ethan had received an award that night. Hundreds of people applauded him. Cameras followed him. Reporters quoted him. On the drive home, he spent nearly 40 minutes talking about future expansion plans. He never once asked how her day had been. It was a small moment, yet somehow it revealed everything. Not because he was cruel, because he had stopped noticing. And when someone stops noticing your sacrifices, your presence slowly becomes optional. Looking back now, Naomi understood something she could not see then. The marriage had not ended on one dramatic day. It ended through thousands of quiet moments where appreciation was replaced by assumption. Respect was replaced by expectation. Partnership was replaced by convenience. Across the ballroom, Ethan laughed at a joke someone told, but the sound seemed distant. Meanwhile, Naomi stood surrounded by people who were beginning to remember who she had been before the divorce became the defining headline of her story. More importantly, they were beginning to wonder who she had become since then. Because the woman standing beneath the crystal lights tonight did not look like someone left behind. She looked like someone who had survived being underestimated. And as old memories continued resurfacing around the room, the foundation of Ethan's carefully crafted narrative began to weaken. Not through confrontation, not through accusation, but through something much harder to control. The truth. The people inside the ballroom only saw the finished version of Naomi Carter. They saw the elegant dress, the steady smile, the confidence that seemed effortless. What they did not see were the years that came before this night. The years nobody applauded. The years nobody posted about. The years when rebuilding her life felt less like a triumph and more like learning how to breathe again. After the divorce, the silence had been the hardest part. Not because the house was empty, but because so much of her identity had been tied to someone else's story. For years, she had been introduced as Ethan Brooks's wife. At business events, charity dinners, industry conferences, everywhere she went, her name seemed attached to his. Then one day it was not. Just like that, the world kept moving. Phone calls became less frequent. Invitations disappeared. Some friendships quietly faded. Naomi could have spent years focusing on what she lost. Instead, she made a different choice. Every morning, she woke up before sunrise. Not because she had to, because routine gave her purpose. She started taking long walks through her neighborhood while the streets were still quiet. She carried coffee in a paper cup and watched the city wake up around her. Construction crews arriving at job sites. Bakery lights turning on before dawn. Delivery trucks rolling through empty streets. Little by little, she stopped looking backward. She enrolled in leadership programs she had once postponed. She attended workshops, read books, took notes, asked questions. For the first time in years, she invested energy into her own future instead of someone else's. The process was not glamorous. There were no magazine covers, no standing ovations. Some days success looked like finishing a project. Other days it looked like simply refusing to quit. Over time, opportunities began appearing. One introduction led to another. One client became 3. 3 became 10. Naomi discovered something surprising about herself. Skills she had spent years using behind the scenes suddenly became valuable when attached to her own name. Strategic planning, relationship building, communication. The abilities that once helped support Ethan's success became the foundation of her own. Months became years. The woman who had once walked into rooms as an accessory gradually became someone people sought out directly. She built a consulting firm focused on organizational development and leadership strategy. Not massive, not flashy, just respected, steady, profitable. Most importantly, it belonged entirely to her. The freedom felt different than success. Success impressed people. Freedom changed people. Naomi no longer checked whether someone approved of her decisions. She no longer shaped her life around expectations she never created. For the first time in years, she trusted herself completely. Back inside the ballroom, guests continued sharing stories and exchanging memories. None of them knew the full journey. They only saw the result. They saw a woman who seemed impossible to intimidate. A woman untouched by the subtle attempts to make her feel small. What they could not see was that confidence had been built one ordinary day at a time. One early morning. One difficult decision. One quiet victory after another. Across the room, Ethan glanced toward her again. The distance between them measured only a few yards. Yet in another sense, it stretched much farther than that. Because the Naomi standing beneath the crystal chandeliers tonight was not the same woman he once knew. She was stronger, calmer, more certain of herself. And while Ethan still believed the evening belonged to him, the truth was already beginning to unfold. The most remarkable transformation in the room was not the wedding. It was the woman everyone thought had been left behind. The evening had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Glasses clinked. Soft music drifted through the ballroom. Guests moved between conversations, while waiters carried silver trays beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Yet beneath the polished surface of the celebration, something had changed. The room no longer felt entirely focused on the wedding. Attention had become divided. People continued watching Naomi, even when they pretended not to. That was when the doors near the main entrance opened again. Unlike Naomi's arrival, there was no visible reaction at first. No sudden silence. No immediate whispers. Just a tall man stepping inside with the quiet confidence of someone completely comfortable in any environment. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit without a tie. Simple, elegant, uncomplicated. His silver watch caught a brief reflection from the chandelier overhead before disappearing beneath his sleeve. He paused for only a moment, scanning the room. Then his eyes settled on one person, Naomi. He did not head toward the bride and groom. He did not stop to greet anyone else. He walked directly toward her. A few nearby guests noticed. Then more people noticed. There was something unusual about the interaction before a single word was spoken. The man looked genuinely pleased to see her. Not impressed. Not surprised. Comfortable. Familiar. As though her presence was the most natural thing in the room. Naomi saw him approaching and smiled. It was a different smile than the polite expressions she had offered throughout the evening. Softer. Warmer. Real. The kind of smile people reserve for someone they trust. The man reached her and offered a small nod. "I hope I am not late," he said. His voice was calm and measured. "Only fashionably late," Naomi replied. He laughed quietly. The exchange lasted only seconds, but several people nearby found themselves watching more closely. Ethan happened to glance in their direction at exactly that moment. His smile faded almost imperceptibly. He did not recognize the man. That alone bothered him. Most people at the wedding belonged to overlapping social and professional circles. Investors, executives, entrepreneurs, community leaders. Yet this stranger seemed entirely unfamiliar. Sophie followed Ethan's gaze. "Who is that?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "I have no idea." Across the ballroom, Naomi and the stranger continued talking. Their conversation appeared effortless. No awkwardness. No performance. No attempt to impress each other. They looked like two people who had shared enough experiences to be comfortable with silence between sentences. That detail attracted even more attention. One guest quietly asked another whether the man worked with Naomi. Another wondered if he was family. Someone else suggested he might be an old friend. Nobody seemed to know. The mystery only made him more interesting. The stranger accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server and stood beside Naomi near the windows overlooking the city skyline. He listened while she spoke. He smiled occasionally. Sometimes he simply nodded. The interaction lacked the exaggerated charm often seen at events like this. Instead, it carried something far more noticeable: respect. Meanwhile, Ethan found himself watching far more than he intended. He told himself it was simple curiosity, nothing more. Yet each time he looked over, he saw another guest noticing the pair. Another conversation paused. Another glance drifted toward the windows. The strange part was that the man was not trying to attract attention. If anything, he seemed entirely indifferent to it. That only amplified the effect. Some people demand the spotlight. Others carry it with them without realizing it. As the evening moved forward, nobody knew the stranger's name. Nobody knew what he did. Nobody knew why his arrival felt important. They only knew one thing. The first person he wanted to see was Naomi Carter. And for reasons nobody could yet explain, that fact seemed to matter more and more with every passing minute. The stranger's arrival had already changed the atmosphere of the room. Nobody could explain why. He had not made a speech. He had not introduced himself. He had not done anything dramatic. Yet wherever Naomi moved, he seemed content to stand beside her, and that simple detail continued drawing attention. The ballroom lights reflected against the floor as the string quartet gradually transitioned into softer dance music. Guests drifted closer to the center of the room, while conversations blended with the gentle rhythm filling the air. The wedding photographer moved between tables, capturing candid moments. Laughter rose and fell. Everything looked normal. But beneath the surface, curiosity continued growing. Naomi and the stranger remained near the windows overlooking the city. At one point, they shared a quiet conversation that made her laugh. Several guests noticed immediately, not because the moment was loud, because it felt genuine. Earlier in the evening, many people had watched Naomi carefully, wondering whether she was hiding pain behind her composure. That theory had quietly disappeared. Nobody laughs like that while carrying the weight of someone else's approval. Across the room, Ethan noticed the same thing. He had spent years believing he understood Naomi. Yet tonight she seemed unfamiliar, lighter somehow, free from expectations he did not realize he had placed upon her. The music changed again. A slower melody drifted through the ballroom. Couples gradually made their way toward the dance floor. Some danced. Others watched. The atmosphere softened. Then the stranger turned toward Naomi and extended his hand. It was such a simple gesture that many people almost missed it. "May I?" he asked. Naomi looked at him for a moment before smiling. Then she placed her hand in his. The reaction was immediate. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Even guests who pretended not to be paying attention found themselves looking toward the dance floor. There was something unexpectedly elegant about the way they moved. Not flashy, not rehearsed, comfortable. They danced like two people who trusted each other completely. The stranger guided her with quiet confidence while Naomi moved with effortless grace. Neither appeared interested in attracting attention. Ironically, that made them impossible to ignore. The photographer instinctively shifted position and captured several images. Nearby guests smiled. Others exchanged curious glances. One woman whispered that they looked like they belonged together. Another wondered how long they had known each other. Nobody seemed focused on the bride and groom anymore. Not intentionally. It simply happened. The center of gravity inside the room had shifted. Sophie noticed it first. She stood beside Ethan while guests watched the couple dancing. For the first time that evening, uncertainty flickered across her expression. Not jealousy, confusion. This was supposed to be their celebration. Yet somehow the most memorable moment unfolding inside the ballroom did not involve either of them. Ethan folded his arms and stared toward the dance floor. The stranger's hand rested respectfully at Naomi's side. Naomi looked relaxed, happy, entirely present. There was no trace of the woman Ethan expected to see. No bitterness, no longing, no regret. And that realization unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Because regret would have confirmed the story, he told himself. Happiness challenged it. Around them, the room continued watching. The dance itself was beautiful, but that was not what held everyone's attention. It was what the dance represented. Confidence without performance. Connection without explanation. Dignity without effort. As the music neared its end, the couple completed a final turn before the applause began. It started with a few guests. Then more joined in. Nothing overwhelming. Just sincere appreciation. Naomi laughed softly and thanked the stranger as they stepped away from the floor. Yet even after the music stopped, people continued watching them. Because something had become unmistakably clear. Earlier that evening, Naomi entered the ballroom as the ex-wife everyone remembered. Now she stood at the center of a story nobody understood yet. And standing beside her was a man whose identity remained a mystery, but whose presence had already transformed the entire night. After the applause faded, the energy inside the ballroom felt different. Not louder, heavier, as if everyone sensed that something important was about to happen without knowing exactly what it was. Naomi and the stranger stepped away from the dance floor and returned to the area near the windows. Several guests continued watching them while pretending to focus on other conversations. The mystery surrounding the man had become impossible to ignore. Who was he? How did he know Naomi? Why did so many people suddenly seem interested in his presence? Ethan found himself asking the same questions. He stood beside Sophie, smiling when necessary, greeting guests when expected, but his attention kept drifting back across the room. Then it happened. A distinguished man near one of the reception tables froze mid-conversation. He stared toward Naomi and the stranger for several seconds before quickly setting down his drink. Without hesitation, he crossed the ballroom. A few people noticed. Then more noticed. The man arrived in front of the stranger and extended his hand immediately. "William Hayes," he said with obvious surprise. "I cannot believe it is actually you." The room did not react at first. Most people simply watched. The stranger smiled politely and shook his hand. "Good to see you again, Robert." The conversation lasted only a few seconds. Yet the name spread through the ballroom with astonishing speed. William Hayes. One guest repeated it quietly. Then another. Within moments, recognition began appearing on faces throughout the room. Some guests reached for their phones. Others exchanged startled glances. Ethan frowned. The name sounded familiar. Very familiar. Then the realization struck. William Hayes, founder of Hayes Capital Partners, one of the most influential investment firms in the country. A man whose interviews appeared in financial magazines. A man who advised Fortune 500 executives. A man whose presence alone could reshape entire industries. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Across the room, more people began approaching William. Not aggressively. Respectfully. One after another. A technology executive introduced himself. A real estate developer offered a greeting. A nonprofit director shook his hand. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Every influential guest seemed to know exactly who he was. Sophie looked at Ethan. That William Hayes? Ethan did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the growing crowd gathering around Naomi and William. The irony landed harder with every passing second. For years, Ethan had hoped to attend events where someone like William Hayes might be present. He had followed interviews, read articles, studied investment strategies. Yet William had walked into the ballroom and ignored every powerful person in attendance. The first person he sought out had been Naomi. Nearby guests continued whispering. Some looked stunned. Others appeared impressed. A few simply looked confused. Why would someone with William Hayes's influence spend the entire evening standing beside Naomi Carter? Why did they seem so comfortable together? Why did he treat her as though she were the most important person in the room? The questions multiplied faster than answers. Meanwhile, William appeared completely unaffected by the attention. He greeted people politely, exchanged brief conversations, and then naturally returned his focus to Naomi. Each time he did, the message became clearer. She was not standing beside him because she needed his status. He was standing beside her because he valued her presence. That distinction changed everything. Ethan watched as several guests who had barely acknowledged Naomi earlier in the evening now approached her directly. Not because she sought attention, because attention had found her. Years ago, Ethan believed success meant becoming the person everyone noticed. Tonight he stood beneath crystal chandeliers, surrounded by luxury and celebration. Yet the room seemed fascinated by someone else entirely. Not the bride, not the groom, Naomi. And beside her stood William Hayes, the man Ethan had admired from a distance for years. In that moment, the final pieces of the evening fell into place. The mystery was gone. The whispers had become certainty. And for the first time all night, everyone understood why the spotlight had shifted. Naomi Carter had not arrived with influence borrowed from someone else. She had become the kind of woman that someone like William Hayes chose to stand beside. The night was beginning to wind down. The music had softened. Some guests were checking their phones. Others were saying their goodbyes. Yet despite the elegant decorations, the wedding cake, the speeches, and the countless photographs, everyone knew what they would remember when they left. Not a centerpiece, not a toast, not even the first dance. They would remember Naomi Carter. Standing near the windows overlooking the city, Naomi listened as William Hayes finished a conversation with a group of guests. The attention surrounding them had become impossible to avoid, but neither seemed interested in encouraging it. That was perhaps the most remarkable part. They never chased the spotlight. It simply followed them. William glanced at his watch and smiled. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Naomi nodded. "I think so." There was no grand announcement. No dramatic farewell. No attempt to make an exit memorable. Naomi thanked a few guests for their kindness, exchanged warm smiles, and prepared to leave. Yet somehow the simple act of her departure drew more attention than many arrivals. People noticed. Conversations paused. Eyes followed her movement across the ballroom. Not because she demanded attention, because she had earned respect. Ethan watched from across the room. The distance between them felt larger than ever. Earlier that evening, he had expected to see someone carrying old wounds. Someone who would quietly compare her life to his and wonder what might have been. Instead, he spent the night watching a woman who no longer measured her worth against anyone else's success. That realization settled heavily in his chest. For years he believed moving on meant proving he had won. A better company, a bigger house, a younger partner, more recognition, more status. Yet standing there beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, he discovered something uncomfortable. Winning and fulfillment were not the same thing. Sophie approached him and slipped her arm gently through his. She looked beautiful. She looked happy. She deserved happiness. Ethan knew that. Yet his attention remained fixed on Naomi for one final moment. Not because he wanted her back. The truth was more complicated than that. He was looking at the life lesson standing in front of him. The lesson he had been too distracted to learn when it mattered. Some people leave your life because the relationship fails. Others leave because you fail to recognize their value until it is too late. Across the ballroom, William offered Naomi his hand as they approached the exit. She accepted it naturally. Not as a display, not as a performance, Just a simple gesture between two people who genuinely cared for one another. Several guests smiled as they passed. Others stepped aside respectfully. A few offered quiet congratulations, though nobody seemed entirely sure what they were congratulating her for. Perhaps it was not success. Perhaps it was freedom. The ballroom doors opened. Cool evening air drifted inside from the city beyond. For a brief second, Naomi paused and looked back. Her eyes moved across the room. The tables, the lights, the guests, the memories. She did not look angry. She did not look triumphant. She simply looked grateful. Grateful for the journey that brought her there. Grateful for the strength she found after losing everything she thought defined her. Then she smiled and walked forward. The doors closed behind her. Inside the ballroom, conversations slowly resumed. Music continued playing. The wedding celebration carried on. Yet something undeniable remained in the air. Long after Naomi left, people continued talking about her. Not because she interrupted the evening, because she transformed it. And somewhere between the first whispered question and the final goodbye, everyone had witnessed the same truth. The most powerful revenge had never been revenge at all. It was dignity. It was growth. It was becoming so complete that the people who underestimated you could only watch from a distance and realize what they had lost. Ethan remained standing beneath the chandeliers as the night continued around him. And for the first time, he understood something he should have learned years ago. She did not win him back. She won herself.